students. I just wanted to do a quick lecture to kind of cover a couple of the things that I feel like I didn't quite get to in lecture in class, but that I think might still be important for you in your persuasive work for this next week or so as you're doing your essays. So there's a couple of purpose pieces here and a couple of goals that I have for this particular lecture. One, I'm going to start with talking a little bit about how I'm going to give you feedback on your major essays, the first of which was the memoir, which I am going to start grading probably today after I'm done with this. The second thing I want to accomplish is I want to talk to you about argumentation generally. I remind you about Aristotle, but then I also want to tell you about some argumentation styles that aren't Aristotelian, but that exist, just so that you're aware of that. And then the third thing I want to do is I want to give you a couple more helpful tidbits on research that I didn't quite get to when we were talking about research in class. So that's the plan. And this will be a required lecture to watch. And so you, FYI, when you're watching a lecture on VoiceThread, you do have to watch it all the way through at normal speed in order to be granted that submission button. So that's the first item to get out of the way. Please watch the whole thing, normal speed, and then you'll be able to submit for a grade. I will try not to talk really slowly so that it's not super annoying. I don't usually talk slowly, but I know sometimes watching a video at normal speed with the way that we operate today can be difficult. So the first thing I want to talk about is feedback. So as much as I want to give everyone really deep feedback on every single one of their essays, it's very, very hard as an English instructor to do that. When you have a lot of things to read, and then you have writing, which is such a complex and robust communication method where there's so many different things going into it, whether it's grammar, it's clarity, it's meaning and purpose, it's effectiveness of the communication, sentence structure, etc., word choice, diction, all these things. And I would love to give everybody feedback on all of those writing elements all the time. The reality of the situation is that there's only so much time in the day, and I can't always do that. So what I've decided to do is that even though everyone deserves deep feedback on everything, I can't always provide that in a timely manner. So in order for me to try to get things graded a little bit more quickly, especially these major essays, I'm going to pick 5 essays that I'm going to grade deeply. And that means I'm going to be commenting on all of those different aspects of writing. I'm going to pick 5 for the first essay, for the memoir, and then I'm going to pick 5 for the persuasive essay. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody else doesn't get a grade. Everybody else gets a grade. It's just that I'm not going to provide deep, individualized feedback for everyone on every essay. So the first essay, I'm going to pick 5 people that are going to get deep, individualized feedback, and everyone else is going to get basically generic rubric feedback, where you have to kind of decipher based on your rubric score what you did or didn't do. And then those 5 people will know exactly what they need to work on. Well, then on the next essay, so on the memoir, I'll pick 5, and then on the persuasive, I'll pick 5. And then it'll be a different 5. That different 5 people will get individualized deep feedback on their persuasive essay, and then so on and so forth. And everybody at some point will get deep individualized feedback on one major essay, and then the other essays might be a little bit more generic in terms of just what's on the rubric and deciphering that. And right now, I'm going to try that and see if it works. With that said, though, this is a really important piece. If you are one of the people that just gets rubric feedback and you're really stumped and you really want to come in and talk to me and get individualized feedback on that particular essay, I would love to talk to you about your essay. So if you get just the rubric filled out and you're like, I really want to know more about what she thought about this, I really would love for you to come into student hours or make an appointment with me, and I'm happy then to give you in person some more verbal, individualized feedback. Okay, so that's what I have to say about feedback. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything like that about that, please let me know. I'm also just going to put an announcement on our course page that kind of details that piece of everything. So let's jump over here in terms of argumentation. So when we were talking about Aristotelian argumentation, we kind of talked about Aristotle, right? So Aristotelian argument, it seeks to prove a point, it uses appeals, and it refutes alternative points of view, which is something that we're basically going to do in our persuasive essay. This is the typical method of argumentation used often in persuasive essays, and that's why we spend time learning it. Aristotelian argumentation, remember, consists of the kairos, telos, ethos, logos, and pathos. And ethos, logos, and pathos being those argumentative strategies, those strategies of appealing to emotions, appealing to logic, and just appealing to credibility or trustworthiness. And all of those things exist. We also have chronologically, it usually looks something like this. You introduce, you explain the exigence of the issue. We talked about exigence in class today on Thursday. You set up that urgency of your argument, and then you present your thesis, okay? Then you present your case that sort of supports your thesis, where you prove your point with appeals. And then you address some sort of a counter argument, and then refute it, saying, oh, there's this, but also what I'm saying is right. Then you provide that proof of your refutation and conclude, okay? Now, this is your typical, I'm sorry, I can't see my PowerPoint. This is your typical organization of a persuasive essay, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't share with you that there were other types of argumentation out there besides just this very typical Aristotelian type. And so I want to talk to you about a couple of the other types that you might encounter in the world of rhetoric out there. Or maybe this will be kind of a refresher for you, like, oh, okay, yeah, I recognize that. That's what we learned about in school. So one of the first ones is Tolman argumentation, and that's where it's basically your paper is set up with a claim and then grounds and then a warrant. So the claim is the main argument. The grounds are those evidence and facts to support the claim. And then the warrant, and that can be implied or directly stated, is basically that the assumption links the grounds to the claim. In Tolman argument, you may have your reader doing more work because you're not explicitly linking those things. And then there's backing, so that's additional support for the warrant, especially if the warrant is implied. Basically, the backing is like another way to provide that exigence for your readers. And then the rebuttal, and the rebuttal is always acknowledging another very valid point of view in the situation. And that's one of the things with counter argument is you almost always want to make sure you're presenting a valid counter argument, but especially in Tolman, you are essentially you are providing a very valid alternative, but you're still just sort of asserting that your way is the correct way. A lot of times this is used in like a proposal situation where you know very well and very clearly that there are multiple ways to address a problem or to do a project, but you want to do it this way. Then you kind of will say, this is how we should do this. This is why. And so it is sort of typical, but it's just a little bit different than Aristotelian argumentation because you're really not worried about ethos, logos, pathos so much. You're not doing so much work to really make everything crystal clear. You are making your reader do a little bit more work sometimes. So this tends to be kind of like something people use in practical situations, if that makes sense. Rogerian argument is really kind of cool. And one of my favorites, to be honest, in terms of types of argumentation. What Rogerian argument does is it seeks to find a middle ground with the opposition, and it's honestly more of like a collegial approach to argumentation, which essentially means it's like we're all colleagues, that get along, right? That aren't out to get each other or anything like that, that are sitting down and trying to solve a problem together as a team. And you're still presenting like the issue and your view on it, but you're doing so in like almost a much more friendly way. And what you're really trying to focus on is how can we build bridges to compromise within our points of view. And so this little outline here of Rogerian argument is kind of a picture of what this might look like in an essay type thing. So you're going to be pro homeschooling. And actually, this is a little bit relevant because some of my students in our comp class are talking about homeschooling versus public schooling. So let's say you are coming from a pro homeschooling stance. You first, in your introduction, straight up, very clearly say, we want to find a compromise between pro homeschoolers and anti-homeschoolers or whatever. And then you would outline both sides of the argument. This is what opponents believe. This is what proponents believe. And then you would go into showing, like side A, you show a deep understanding of the positions that are opposed to yours. You present those in not a negative light. You know, you show a deep understanding and almost like an empathy for like, I get this, it's valid, I understand this point of view. Then you would say, but here's my point of view, and here are the benefits, and here's why, you know, I believe what I believe. It's almost like you do you, and it's okay to believe what you believe. Here's what I believe, or what this side believes. And then you guys seek to build a bridge of compromise between the two sides. So what's the best solution that bridges and connects us, and where we give and we get, you know, and then you present that. So I really like Rogerian argument, and honestly, I feel like Rogerian argument could be one of the most realistic argument styles, because in the workplace and in industry, you're very rarely going to just butt heads with each other and say, you're wrong, here's why, you're wrong, here's why. There is a lot of validity to multiple perspectives on any issue, you know, and I think that it's really that way in the world. The reality in the world is a lot of times people have a perspective for a reason, and their perspective is really valid. And so we honestly, to get anything done, we have to find ways to compromise, and solutions to any issue can be very complex. And sometimes they're good for some groups and not others, and sometimes vice versa, right? So Rogerian argument I really like. It's not as Aristotelian, definitely, because Aristotle was all about when you're confident that you're right, you prove it, end of story. And that this is not that way. So I just wanted you to know that that existed. And then lastly, inductive versus deductive. You might hear these terms, and as a comp instructor, it's just, I think, kind of important to, oh, my lights just turned off, sorry guys, to include these terms in our curriculum. And so I'm just going to continue as if the lights are on. Somebody will walk in, I'm sure. So inductive reasoning or inductive argumentation is a bottom-up approach. And really what you're doing is you're starting with details, observations, and evidence, and then you're ending with that conclusion. If you remember back to that one TED Talk that I had you watch by Robert Sapolsky, he did inductive reasoning there. He didn't necessarily state his thesis kind of until the end of his speech. And that's kind of what this is. And scientific writing, some of the studies that you're reading right now, they won't actually present their findings or like what they're trying to ultimately say with their findings until that very last section. It's called the discussion. And that's kind of that inductive reasoning where everything is laid out, and then they say, therefore, this is what I think, or this is the main idea, or this is the thesis. Most of the time, what we do in comp is we do the deductive reasoning. It's a top-down approach. So we reveal that generalized statement up front, this is what I'm going to write about. This is my generalized thesis, the main point I have, and then you back that up with details and evidence, and you maintain that throughout. So those are the slides that we didn't get to when we were talking about Aristotle's appeals. So I just wanted to let you guys know that those slides exist, and that those are things that we just didn't quite get to. So you're seeing all my screen pals, sorry guys. And so now I want to get, and I'm just going to flip through these slides really quick. So close your eyes if this is going to drive you nuts. We talked about all of these things, right? We talked about credibility, reliability, and validity, and bias a little bit. We talked about that. And we were really talking about all of these things in the sense that research is very important, and it's important to find those credible and reliable sources. I think I had you guys do this. I'm pretty sure Felicia reminded me too. We had, the algorithm kind of sometimes determines what different people will see when they just Google something. And so sometimes just Googling things doesn't work. We talked a little bit about the CRAP test, and I'd love to talk about this a little bit more, especially since it seems like you guys are struggling a bit to identify how your sources pass the CRAP test. When you guys are crafting your proposals, I really want you to pull up this slide and take a look at this. Currency, how does the time of the source affect its credibility or the quality? Reliability, authority, and purpose. You guys are doing this, but you don't seem like you have very much to say about these things. Most of you just say, well, it's a scholarly source, therefore it has authority. I would like more than that, to be honest. And I think, honestly, you're doing yourself a favor by doing a little bit more digging. So just because it's in a scholarly journal, what do we know about the author? What do we know about that journal? Is it a widely read journal? Is it a little tiny hole-in-the-wall journal? Like, what do we know? And that doesn't mean that hole-in-the-wall journals are less reputable. Sometimes they're not. And they're still the scholarly journals, so they're still vetted. But I want you to feel more confident in knowing, like, this is why this is a good source. It's not quite enough to just say it's from a scholarly journal, therefore. I want you to feel like you know why scholarly journals are considered more credible. And then always looking at the purpose of a source is beneficial, because that's just going to show you where your most credible information is going to lie. If the purpose is to solely just to educate or to reveal results of a study, that's going to be big, and this is where there's a big difference between scholarly journal purpose usually and the purpose of articles that maybe are just in mainstream media. So really kind of come back to this as you guys are doing your next proposal, so that you can really understand what you're trying to say. When you annotate each of those sources, you really should be able to say at least a sentence on each of these things, which means your annotation should be at least 4 sentences long. And right now they're not. Okay. This is your purpose slide. I think this is kind of important. Okay. We talked a little bit about this when we were talking about persuasion. What's the difference between fact and opinion? And opinions, and this is where conspiratorial thinking can get kind of dangerous. People can have opinions, and they might be making some leaps like, oh, there's a correlation, so therefore it must be that this is, if there's a correlation, therefore it must be fact that this one thing connects to the other thing. And actually that's a logical fallacy. But what we need to understand is that if the majority of the scientific literature says one thing, then to be honest, that's widely accepted as fact. If you have 95% of scientific literature that says X happens, X plus Y equals XY, right? And then you have 1% over here that says, well, actually, no, it doesn't. And then you have 1% or 4% that says, well, we don't really know. It's definitely going to be more broadly considered credible to say that that's a fact because 95% of the literature says so. So just FYI that your opinion, especially in persuasive writing, is only worth what you can support it with. So you may have some thoughts about connections being made, like, for example, I don't know, like you could say something like COVID-19 was a fake virus. Okay, just spitballing. And that can be an opinion, all right? So that can be someone's opinion, and everyone is entitled to their opinion, and that's okay. However, if 99% of scientists, doctors, credible experts in the field are saying COVID is a real virus, then the opinion that COVID is a fake virus is widely seen as wrong because the facts do not support that opinion. So your opinions are only worth as much as they can be proven with facts, okay, and supported with facts. Where we're doing our persuasive essays, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, I believe or I think this needs to happen, or I think this is what's real. And then your task is going to be, you need to find those facts and that research to support that. So if you want to argue, that the federal government actually wants people to continue to be trafficked, and they're behind some trafficking rings, and they actually don't want this problem to be solved, you're going to need to find a lot of research to support that, because that looks like a conspiracy theory on the outside, where it's just like maybe a couple of things match up that makes us think that this thing could be true. But until you find credible, reliable, copious amounts of experts in the field, really smart people, credible people, studies, whatever it might be, that would substantiate that, you really can't support it with fact. And so to put it out there as an opinion in an academic paper is a problem. I'm not saying it's a problem for you to talk to your friends about what your thoughts are, but to put it in an academic paper and then not have it supported with fact, that's the tough thing there. Okay. All right. This slide is one of my last ones I just want to show you, because I do really think that this does come into play a lot in our world. And that is confirmation bias. And I think all of us fall victim to this. Confirmation bias is the tendency to basically believe something that aligns with what we already think. So it's our tendency to gather evidence that confirms our pre-existing expectations. So typically we do this by emphasizing or pursuing supporting evidence and then dismissing or failing to seek out contradictory evidence and just ignoring everything that doesn't already align with our viewpoint. And this is where we also get into that Procrustes bed situation that I don't know if anyone has taken the time to read on the module page. But this is where we basically bend information to support what we want to say and what we already tend to believe, rather than remaining open-minded to learning, and perhaps even allowing our opinions to shift a little bit if needed. We all kind of do this. We have a tendency to believe things that come at us that already basically support what we think. So if you think, for example, like, I don't know, and the algorithm doesn't help with this at all, by the way, because what the algorithm does is it starts to recognize what you like to read and what you tend to read more, and then it keeps feeding you stuff that seems to support that, because they know you're going to click on it, because that's our confirmation bias, where we want to click on things that supports what we want to think, or that what we already think. So if you are someone who, believed in aliens before it was proven they existed or whatever, you might have the tendency to click on things more often that would suggest that alien evidence has been found, right? And that's just kind of how this works. I wanted to just really quick show you this idea of the Procrustean bed, and then we'll close up. So Procrustes from Greek mythology. He was a psychopathic character who would offer hospitality to people, to travelers, and then once the traveler went to bed, he would be gross. So if the victim was too short to fit perfectly in this bed that he gave them, he would pound them with a hammer until they stretched to fit. If the victim was too tall to fit Procrustes' bed, he would cut off limbs to make them fit. No one survived the bed, not even Procrustes, when the hero Theseus discovered what he was doing. So basically, this Greek myth is telling us, the moral of the story is, you shouldn't distort what's there just to fit your predetermined belief. You need to be fair, and you need to be open-minded and logical. Be fair with your opinions and the evidence you use to support them. If you get a bunch of sources that are not aligning with what you thought your thesis was, and you can't find credible sources that do align with your thesis, then that should tell you something. And one of the things that should tell you is that it might be time to explore whether or not your opinion is a good one, is an accurate one, should be something that you think, and go out there and talk about. I'm not saying, that there aren't opinions out there that maybe we couldn't find support on. There could be, but that's the thing about education. The more educated we become, the more educated opinions we can form. And I guess what I've learned is the more educated I become, the more willing I am to say, I don't know. Because opinions are very hard to form when you know that there's more information out there that you haven't seen, and that there might be information out there that changes my mind. A lot of times I find myself saying, well, this is what I think right now, but I'm open to learning more, because I think there's always information out there, and we have to be really careful of our confirmation bias, and we have to be really careful that we're not reading a study and distorting what it's actually saying to fit what we want it to say, because we have predetermined beliefs. So that's kind of what confirmation bias is all about, and I did really feel like that was an important slide to talk about in research, and I know I didn't get to that slide during that lecture. The last slide that I have in this is, I have two more slides in this research that we didn't get to. One of these talks about URLs, and it discusses what URLs tend to be more credible than others. And it is determined by the purpose of that website. A lot of times .com is going to depend entirely upon the reputation and the writers that they employ. .org, it depends on the mission. What we need to know about .org is these are all organizations that have a website, and that website aligns with their agenda. And so you have to know that all of the information that they put on that website is going to support their own agenda. So that means that the information can be biased, because they're not vetting it. They're not necessarily even trying to present multiple perspectives. They're trying to advance their own agenda there. And they can do that. Nobody says they can't. They're an organization. So you have to be really careful with .orgs and a little bit skeptical. NPR.org, for example, is going to have a totally different mission than PETA. NPR, in fact, I have it in my notes here, it's a nonprofit media organization that was founded on a mission to create a more informed public. So you can take that and you still might have to say, well, it's still an organization, but if their mission is to help the public be informed and they're a nonprofit, so they're not necessarily being maybe influenced by other sources of income or whatever, then maybe they're kind of trustworthy. Whereas PETA's mission says we oppose speciesism, which is a human supremacist worldview, and focus on our attention on the 4 areas in which the largest numbers of animals suffer the most intensely for the longest periods of time: in laboratories, in food industry, in the clothing trade, and in the entertainment business. So what we can assume from that is that PETA is going to put information out that supports that agenda. So all of the information that they put out is going to be information that opposes the human supremacist worldview and that shows how animals are being abused in these ways. And so there's a big difference there between NPR.org and PETA.org and what they're seeking to do and probably how they're doing it. So just be aware of that. Typically, if it's a .edu, again, those are people that are experts in their field that most often want to maintain integrity in their field because they're people with PhDs in their field and that kind of thing. So they're often credible. I'm not going to say always, ever in research. I never say always and never, except for never saying it. But those can often be credible. And then .govs are also often credible because that information is vetted by a lot of different people and a lot of different experts in the field. So .govs can also be very credible. People often ask about Wikipedia, and what I say is it's not a credible and reliable source just because of the way that it is created, but that doesn't mean that there is nothing credible on there and that everything is bonk. That's not true. It could be a good place to start learning more about your topic, but I wouldn't use it as a source on your works cited or your references section. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't reference it for your own self, maybe get some background information from Wikipedia, but I don't find it to be a good source for your references section. So hopefully that is helpful. For right now, I feel like those are the main things that I wanted to communicate that in those lectures that I just didn't get to. When we met on Tuesday, we looked at the SQ3R strategy. So review that. I'm going to make sure that PowerPoint is on our module page for you. If you are reading your scientific articles and you're just feeling overwhelmed by how much research you're seeing. If you guys have any questions on any of this or on anything, please know I'm here to support you, to help you. Send me emails, come in for student hours. I'm happy to help. So if you have any questions about feedback, about types of argument, about research, or about anything else in your persuasive essay, please reach out. Okay, thanks for watching.